Brilliance Audio presents the unabridged recording of Wages of Sin by Mark Wheaton, performed by Tim Andrés Pabon. Part 1. 1. Had it already been a year? Mrs. Contreras looked out her front window, careful not to trouble the blinds. The man in black was there, just on the other side of her gate, as if deciding whether to enter. He never did, and she imagined he never would. She'd first seen him on that night, that horrible night, 14 years ago. It had been unseasonably hot all that week, the window unit in her bedroom barely worked, so she'd taken to sleeping in the living room under the ceiling fan. That was when it had happened, right out in front of her home. The house at 6780 Diaz Boulevard was nothing special, built in the late 50s after the original, almost entirely Latino citizenry of Chavez Ravine had been relocated with false promises by the city of Los Angeles to make way for Dodger Stadium. To Mrs. Contreras, now pushing 80, this wasn't ancient history. Whenever she saw young Latino men in their Dodger gear or head sports broadcasters refer to the stadium as Chavez Ravine, she wondered if they didn't know what had happened there. Or maybe they knew full well and didn't care. It was the 21st century. Why you gotta live in the past, abuela? Maybe that was why she'd come to sympathize with the man in black. He couldn't escape the past either. She would never be able to accurately remember how many shots there had been. One day she'd remember 7, another 8, another 4, another 9. She imagined that she'd been awoken by the first, but what if it had been the second or third? Whatever the case, she'd thrown herself off the sofa and onto the floor. Only one bullet struck her house, entering the front window and embedding itself in the ceiling. As plaster drifted down into her hair, she realized that if her instinct had been to stand rather than fall, the bullet might have ended up in her head. The shots ended and she waited for more. More never came. She waited for screams, for footsteps, for anything, but heard only silence. After a few minutes, distant sirens drew close, and she crawled to the window. There was a car parked in front of her house with 2 men slumped in the front seat. One was rotating his head as if unable to control his neck. The other looked dead. Then she saw the one on the sidewalk. He was a teenager, but well-dressed. She would later remember thinking he looked as if he'd returned from church. This turned out to be the case. When the police arrived...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?